field now. They've dropped ropes out of the nose of the ship, and it's been taken a hold out down on the field by a number of men. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it. It bursts into flames. Wait, get it started. It's crashing terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's burning, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the morning baths and all the folks between us. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's 400 or 500 feet into the sky. It's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the flame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the fans are screaming around it. I told you. Can't let you talk to people. His friends are out there.
At 7:21, the Hindenburg hovered 180 feet above the ground, just short of the landing mast. Passengers waved to the crowd below. One of them was Joseph Spar. His wife, Evelyn, never took her eyes from the ship.
He dropped the ropes, and as soon as that rope hit the ground, bing.
At 7:25, most of the witnesses on the field reported seeing flames on the top of the ship. Seconds later, the Hindenburg blew up.
From that moment on, for the next 10 or 12 seconds, I was running and getting out from under it. When I looked back over my shoulder again, the ship was hitting the ground, and I saw two men crawling away from it. And I ran back to help them.
All the crew in the forward part of the ship were killed. But miraculously, 61 people got out alive, 2/3 of those who were on board. From the evidence it had, the inquiry concluded that the fire had started on the top of the ship. The probable cause, the ignition of hydrogen by a static charge on the hull. There were no pictures of the first flames outside the ship. The best evidence is from witness statements, and an analysis of these tells a different version of events. One in which the fire began inside, and hydrogen wasn't the primary cause of the disaster, but it rapidly turned an accident into a catastrophe.
They dropped the ropes, but it was at the rear of the ship that the flames shot up, and it went very fast.
Spectators may have seen flames on the hull of the ship, but crew who were in the stern had a glimpse of hell before then. As the Hindenburg approached the landing mast, rigger Hans Freund attempted to drop a landing line. It got caught in steel bracing wires, as these pictures show. Freund called for help. Number 2 helmsman Helmut Lau climbed up from the lower fin to release it. When both men looked up toward the front of the ship, they were horrified by what they saw. Freund described seeing a flash, and Lau saw a bright reflection at the front of cell number 4, near the central walkway. Next, they heard a muffled detonation, and then a thud. The Hindenburg's back had broken. Had Freund and Lau seen the start of the fire? Why wasn't it observed by witnesses on the field before then?
But certainly, you've got cells, you've got the outer skin. I don't think you'd see anything until it got to the surface.
If the fire did start in the keel, why hadn't the hydrogen already ignited?
You could have a major fire down below, and it's not going to affect the hydrogen.
From witness statements and the images that have survived, there is evidence that the fire began below the central walkway between cells 4 and 5. The engines and the electrical system were involved, and a fuel other than hydrogen played a key role. But Commander Rosendahl, the head of the original inquiry, dismissed a clue when it walked through his door.
So Commander Rosendahl said to me, "Bobby, what did you say? Where were you?"
Bobby Rutan was walking to the landing mast when the Hindenburg passed over his head. Its engines were hot from being in hard reverse, and he's certain he smelled diesel fuel.
He thought for a moment, looked at me, And then he slammed his desk and said, "Bobby, that is not what happened." I said, "But Commander," he said, "Bobby, go home."
If it wasn't fuel, what did Bobby smell?
The reports of smelling fuel, that would almost certainly be diesel, because it vaporizes so slowly, it hangs around.
The Hindenburg's 4 engines used diesel fuel, which had a low flash point. It was piped between storage tanks in the keel and the engine cars. Under the right conditions, it could explode.
Clearly what they've done is they've distributed the fuel all the way along the fuselage. That keeps the centre of gravity right.
It also stiffened the Hindenburg's 804-foot frame. During the Atlantic crossing, the Hindenburg had encountered strong headwinds. When it approached Lakehurst, it was traveling at 64 knots, 80 miles an hour. Then it was put into a tight turn. The frame was stressed, and so were electrical cables and the fuel lines. Small leaks in the fuel system were more than a possibility. They were a probability. During the landing maneuver, the engines had been pushed beyond their operational limitations. They were hot, and there was no wind or air movement through the engine cars to cool them down. By 7:21, fuel pipes from the keel were also hot. A small fuel leak might not have been a problem when the Hindenburg was moving, but in the 4 minutes it was stationary, highly flammable oil vapor could have formed and self-combusted. Or another possibility exists.
Diesel oil ignites most easily, more easily than petrol, if you have a drop onto a hot surface. It would be the diesel that would be the most likely to give that little ignition source.
The investigators have identified other evidence which indicates that the fire started in the keel.
There's these great blobs of something as well, and I don't know what they are, because on the video when we saw the rear ballast being dumped,
They were streams, weren't they?
They were just streams.
They look like solid chunks of water, don't they?
It looks more solid than water,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah.
At least you can sort out exactly where they're coming from, but that is unexplained, and I don't like things that are unexplained. I just wonder what they are.
In 1937, investigators concluded that 2 water ballast tanks had been torn loose by the shock of the explosion. But an analysis of the ship's plans showed that one of these tanks could only have contained fuel. As both blew out at about the same time, it's likely they were connected to each other. Why those 2? Why did they burst out of the hull as the first flames were seen to come from the stern? And does this suggest that something happened within the ship prior to the hull catching fire?
If you did start with a ignition source in the central area, that would then spread upwards, and the chances are, I guess, you wouldn't see anything until it reached the top skin and burnt through. Before that, it would be almost invisible.
You think it was on the inside rather than the skin?
Well, both.
The official inquiry concluded that an electrostatic charge on the hull ignited free hydrogen. The charge could have built up naturally from thunderstorms in the vicinity, or the hull could have been charged by simply moving through the air. In 1937, German scientists tested fabric from the hull. It had been painted with a solution of aluminium and iron oxide to stiffen the fabric and to protect it from ultraviolet rays. It was found to be highly flammable. But in these images, the fire is moving through the keel well ahead of the surface flames. Something was burning down below, and the most flammable material in the keel was diesel fuel. The source of its ignition will probably never be known, but once the fire was established there, it was only a matter of seconds before it reached the hydrogen cells. The official inquiry considered a number of theories, but none of these could be proved. If the full service history of the Hindenburg had been examined, investigators might have got closer to the truth.
The fact remains the thing was a flying bomb. And I personally think they were very, very lucky to get along as long as they did before something like this happened. It was inevitable.
Years later, Dr. Eckener stopped blaming Captain Pruss. He accepted that a number of failures had occurred. But by then, the world had other things to